how about physical pain as well? Can that actually be a sign or a symptom of grief?
You will start to have headaches, sometimes it will create confusion, lack of concentration, which are affecting the body, and then the body is going to get quite tense. You're trying very hard to not to express the grief because it's painful. One of the things we are not very good at doing, and which we do to everybody else, is giving ourselves compassion.
So if someone is experiencing this, and then obviously counselling on its own maybe wouldn't work, is there anything else that they can do? Welcome to the Life and Loss podcast, where we break down barriers surrounding discussions of death and grief, making listeners feel less alone. We often think of the emotional aspects of grief, such as sadness, anger and shock. However, grief can also impact your physical health. The changes can be quite frightening, and in today's episode of the Life and Loss podcast, I'll be chatting to Dania, a bereavement counsellor, about the ways in which grief can affect the body. So thank you for joining me, Dania.
Thank you for having me here today, Hannah.
Can you start by explaining some of the common physical effects of grief that can happen to the body?
Yes, and it's an interesting one because I know last time I spoke about the stages of grief, but often people after the shock can get quite numb, so don't feel that physical pain that they might have. But eventually, if I start from the head down, you will start to have headaches, sometimes it will create confusion, lack of concentration, which are affecting the body, and then the body is going to get quite tense. You feel like your heart is broken, and you may have even tummy upset, and all sorts of symptoms that somehow you try to just push away. And I sometimes think about this as your mind is trying very hard to get on with everything you need to do, and just saying to the body, I don't want to know what's going on for you. And that's why often people are ignoring their physical symptoms until it starts to catch up with them.
Yeah. Can it affect your sleep pattern or the amount of sleep that you get?
Yes, of course, it will affect your sleep because it depends on how you are managing the grief. So if you're trying to push it away during the day and get yourself really busy and distracted, when you come up in the evening when you're ready to go to bed, then it all comes up and might stop you from sleeping. Sometimes people say, I can go to sleep, but then I will wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning or whenever, and I can't go back to sleep. And that's very normal.
Yeah. And how about your appetite? Because normally when you're upset, it's difficult to eat and you don't fancy any food. Can your appetite completely go, or the opposite? Can you eat more for comfort as well?
Yes. When we see clients, we do a questionnaire and we often ask them, are they comfort eating or not eating? So this could simply be because, of course, of the grief, like you were saying. Some people might lose their appetite, but it can also happen because of how their loved one have died. So I had a client that her husband had the upper GI and it was affecting his digestion. So she had to liquidize all his food. So when he died, she just couldn't eat. And you sometimes have people who might go and do some, food shopping, and they just can't relate to food depending on the type of cancer that that loved one had.
Yeah. And I've heard before as well, some people who throughout their whole life may have never experienced a panic attack or any sort of anxiety, and then they lose their loved one and all of a sudden they've got tightness in the chest, they're having panic attacks as well. How can people cope with this, and is this quite common as well?
So it is very common because it's one of those things, like I said, is that when you try to ignore your body and you're just trying to soldier on with your brain, then your body is starting to get into panic and tension, and you feel like you can't breathe. So I often say to clients, well, you don't die from panic attack, but it's a very scary process because you genuinely feel like if you're dying because you can't breathe. Yeah. So what we will do is some physical exercise or breathing exercise and gently trying to slow down your breathing. Sometimes I might use things like using the 5 senses. So you just look out of the window, what can you see, what can you hear, what can you smell, touch. So with the 5 senses, while you are concentrating on this, you're forgetting about the fact that you've got difficulty breathing.
I hope that you're finding this episode helpful as you navigate through your own grieving journey. Grief is deeply personal and often isolating. If you'd like to share your own thoughts and experiences, please comment below. And how about physical pain as well? Can that actually be a sign or a symptom of grief?
Yes. So often the reason people are trying to avoid thinking about the grief is because grief is painful. There is no doubt about it. And often people feel like, if I try to get them to look into their body, they will say, well, I got this big hole in my heart, or my heart is broken. And that's very normal. Their loved one has died, so they are going to have some physical pain from the grief. And so what I try to say about this is it doesn't have, it's little step, but try to stay with the feeling. Try to put your hand on your heart and just feel the pain and let it go through the breathing exercise.
That's really good advice, actually. And I know you've spoken to me before and you've said that you can actually lose the ability to speak completely as well. Can you tell me a bit more about this?
Yes, and that is actually, I had a client who this happened and she just couldn't speak and she had to have speech and language therapy. And it's because you're trying very hard to not to express the grief because it's painful. So you will have a blockage, and the blockage can be in your heart, can be in your throat, can be in the tension in your muscles because you're tensing up. So it's not unusual for somebody not to be able to speak because they are really trying very hard to stop the grief coming up and the tears coming out.
So if someone is experiencing this, and then obviously counselling on its own maybe wouldn't work because if they're not able to talk and do talking therapies, is there anything else that they can do?
So we are very lucky at Forest Holme because we've got a complimentary service, and they also are letting us have bereaved clients using, because usually it was more for patient, and so a complementary therapy, whether you have a Reiki or reflexology or a massage, because like I was explaining about the tension in the body, when you're grieving, you tense up. And like you said, if you can't speak, then counseling is not going to be very helpful. But if you go to have a massage, which is going to release the tension in the body, and I often say to people, if you're having a massage and you start crying, don't worry about it. It's very normal because you're letting go. And by letting go, you will start to cry. So the Reiki as well is very good because it's moving the energy in the body. So like I said, we are very lucky to be able to offer our client possibility of having complementary therapy as well.
Yeah. So if someone listening to this podcast today is really feeling the physical effects of grief, what advice would you give them? What would you say to them?
Well, it's trying to stay connected between your mind and your body. And because I describe it sometimes like, your mind is here and your body is saying, hey, wait for me. So it's trying to connect and to listen, what does my body need? And for this, you need to sit with your body and check where you are. Now, one of the things we are not very good at doing, and which we do to everybody else, is giving ourselves compassion. And, self-compassion. Just listen to your body. If your body is hurting, don't do it for too long, but just spend 5 minutes just noticing where it happened. Also, exercise is very good. Just going for a walk, because again, if you just sit up all the time, then you're going to be tense. But if you go and have a bit of exercise, you're moving the body, you're moving the energy, and you're letting the grief come through.
Thank you so much, Dania. And thank you for listening to the Life and Loss podcast. If you'd like more information on our charity, you can visit our website, which is forestholmehospice.org.uk. Thank you. Grief is a journey that none of us should navigate alone. If today's interview resonated with you, or if you know someone who could benefit from hearing it, I'd encourage you to subscribe and share this podcast. By spreading the word, you help us to reach others who may be grieving, letting them know that they're not alone and that there's a community here to support them.